Welcome to the Bioptimizers Awesome Health Podcast. And now, here's your host, Wade T. Lightheart.
What if you could double your energy naturally without caffeine or stimulants in just 3 short months? It's not only possible, you can transform every aspect of your health if you follow the 12-week blueprint we've created for you in the Awesome Health System. The Awesome Health System is a free course where you receive a daily video lesson spanning the most cutting-edge secrets for air, water, exercise, sunshine, optimizers, mindset, and education. It's something most companies would charge hundreds of dollars for, yet you get it for free when you go to bioptimizers.com. To access your course, register to download the PDF report called 3 Phases of Bioptimization, which gets you access to the report and daily access to the first lesson in the 12-week, 84-day Awesome Health course.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. It's Wade T. Lightheart from Bioptimizers with another edition of the Awesome Health Podcast. And today we're going to be talking to Chris Mirabile, who is the founder of Novos Lab, and this amazing story, particularly around anti-aging, as well as overcoming a very serious condition in his childhood. Basically, what Chris has been able to do is he's achieved biological age, and we're going to unpack that a little bit in a second. That's 13.6 years younger than his chronological age, and how he continues to age about 31% lower than normal. So in other words, extending the quality of life, I think is a big factor. Now, and to do that, we're going to look beyond exercise aesthetic. You know, Chris's story of overcoming adversity, basically had a childhood brain tumor that kind of got him interested in it. There's always a backstory of how people get interested in aging early on. I think that's fun. I have a correlated story for those who've listened to the podcast. But anyways, this has allowed him and motivated him to dig deeper into why and how of the health of living. And so Novos is the first ever company to develop science-based solutions addressing the 12 biological causes of aging. And of course, his journey is extremely inspiring. After surviving a brain tumor at 16, Chris committed himself to mastering his health through his dedication. He's been able to not only reduce his own biological age, but he's extended that into taking Novos as on a mission to make longevity accessible. Of course, that aligns very much with what we're doing at Bioptimizers. So I want to welcome Chris, who's joining us from West Palm Beach. Thanks for joining the show.
Of course. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Every great idea, I think, starts with some sort of personal adversity. I've seen those founding stories over and over and over again. Someone had a big, hairy problem and had to find solutions outside of the box. And that journey, often painful and challenging, leads to a motivation that connects a company to the soul of what that problem is, or the genesis to the solution, and provides that. It seems that's the case with Novos. Maybe you can walk us through how you got started. What was it like to get this diagnosis? What was happening maybe from what was conventional applications, and then how you were able to kind of go on a completely different innovative path?
Sure, of course. So my story actually begins when I was a kid. I was 12 years old and I started reading Men's Health magazine and exercising and trying to get into good shape and eating a healthy diet and so on. And so it was that much more of a shock to me and my friends and my family when I was suddenly diagnosed with a brain tumor as a 16-year-old, because I was already living healthier than my peers. And so, like, why would I, of all people, get a brain tumor? And it was discovered because I suddenly had a seizure. I was on a school trip in New York City. And next thing I knew, after feeling a little bit dizzy and nauseous, I woke up with blood all over my shirt because I had severed my tongue and I was bleeding from my mouth. And I woke up on the floor, and they had to rush me to the emergency room and wait for my parents because I was a minor. But eventually they gave me the CAT scan and they said, "We found a large mass above your left ear. You have a brain tumor." It was a pilocytic astrocytoma. It was larger than a golf ball. It was on my temporal lobe, bumping up against my hippocampus, my memory center. And so we needed to do emergency surgery. They were going to do it the same day. We were able to actually delay it by about 3 days for a world-class neurosurgeon who was going to be in after the weekend passed. And so we waited for him. And fortunately, the surgery worked out well. I mean, it was transformative in many ways for me. I like to look at the positive through every situation I get myself into and try to find the lessons I can learn from it. And so for me, I looked at it rather than as being like a victim of this brain tumor. I looked at it as a gift. How can I actually transform this into a gift? And it really changed my perspective on life. I went from playing on the high school football team to no longer being able to because I couldn't have any trauma to the head. So I ended up writing poetry on the weekends. Like it was just a very different version of Chris that I was discovering, but became very introspective and other sides of me blossomed from that. One of the things that it also did was it planted a seed for me to be interested in health at a new level. Because prior to that, why was I reading Men's Health magazine and working out and eating healthy? It's because I wanted to be attractive to the girls in school. Like, let's be
Right,
honest, that's
exactly.
what got
Yeah.
me motivated.
Aesthetics is a
And
big motivator when you're, especially as a young man, and you see those covers with these ripped, hyper muscular men, and you're discovering your masculinity. I was hooked for the same thing from Muscle and Fitness when I was a kid, so I totally can
yep,
relate.
I picked up Muscle and Fitness, Muscle Media magazine, all of those.
Yeah, yeah.
So uh, yeah, so that was the original interest in health. But after having a brain tumor, I came to realize health is much more complex than that, and it's about as you have in your name there, biooptimization. It's about optimization of your biology so that not only can you feel as good as possible, but you're also reducing the risk of something going wrong biologically, which then translates into getting a disease of some sort. And so I wanted to do everything I could to prevent ever having a brain tumor again or any sort of life-threatening condition. I didn't want to be on a hospital bed again, wondering if I would wake up the next morning. That's what I had been through. So with that seed that was planted, whenever I would look into health or be in some way or another, whether that be by a doctor or a wellness enthusiast or an influencer, I always ask the question, is this good for me, not only for that short-term goal that they're focused on, but also in the long term as well? And more often than not, people weren't actually looking into the long-term implications of the things that they were recommending. And maybe it's because the research wasn't fully developed yet, or because they didn't know themselves. And so I took it upon myself to start digging into the research. And I would be on PubMed, was like my new favorite website just over a decade ago, just searching scientific papers and reading them and trying to grow an understanding of these different topics that were interesting to me. Eventually, I came across a scientific paper called The Hallmarks of Aging. And that was the epiphany moment. That's when I came to realize that aging is a process that is malleable, it can be sped up, and it can be slowed down. And we are understanding the underlying mechanisms for why we age. So, at a biological, microscopic scale, what's actually happening in our bodies that cause us to age, that cause our tissues and organs to not function properly, to make our face and our skin change, to make our heart less resilient. What's actually happening? And when I came to learn these at the time, 9 mechanisms of aging, there's actually 12 now. I I I I had a new vision for my health, which was if I could focus on these specific mechanisms, not only am I going to optimize my health today and how I feel today, I'm also going to reduce significantly the risk of these diseases. And in the process, I'll be slowing down the aging process and all of the other great things that can come along with that. Looking younger when you're older, feeling younger when you're older, your cognition being sharp, and so on. So I felt like this was the ultimate lens through which to look at health. And I started to then network with and attend biotech events in the field of biogerontology, essentially, which is the study of aging from a biological perspective.
Absolutely fascinating. I can relate to a lot of those elements. What are the 12 mechanisms of aging? And maybe we can unpack what are the, the things where people can get the most bang out of their buck from a lifestyle perspective. Because I'm sure you've also cultivated, okay, here's the things that are causing the aging, but what are the antidotes or the speed reducers?
Sure, sure. So yeah, there's a lot of different things that we can dig into here. So would you like me to actually explain what each of the 12 are, or just
I would. I
list
think
them
our
off?
I think our
Okay.
listeners are fascinated because this is a topic that there's a tremendous amount of ambiguity around. Everybody talks about
Yeah,
aging, but they don't really dive into or understand the specifics and maybe
yeah,
where they might direct some attention to, or they may not have considered. And then, you could probably boil down to a few, you know, step one, step two, step three kind of
sure.
remediations.
Sure, sure. Happy to. Okay. So first, I'll start with some or the very first one at least, that people are probably familiar with at this point. So that's mitochondrial dysfunction. So our mitochondria are the power plants of our cells, and as we get older, we have fewer of them, and the ones we have are not as efficient at producing the power that they need. Now, this is important because when you think of energy production, most people think of like feeling energized. And although that is part of it, it goes well beyond that. Like, for example, if your liver cells need to detoxify your body and they don't have enough energy, they won't detoxify your body as well, right? So just think of each cell and organ and what its job is. And if it doesn't have enough energy, it's not going to perform as well. So it goes well beyond just feeling energized. It's the organs actually performing their function that degrades when your mitochondria degrades.
Mhm.
That's the first one. Second is cellular senescence. So people are starting to talk a little bit about cellular senescence in the biohacker world, if you will. It's kind of funny because there's these 12 mechanisms, and you'll see that some of them are brand new terms that biohackers haven't like gotten to yet, but
Yep.
eventually they will. And I'm trying to bring these into the light now sooner than later. But cellular senescence is something that they're beginning to talk about, and that is these zombie cells that people oftentimes refer to them as, that start to accumulate as we age. So they are cells that are not living nor dead. There's different reasons why they exist. For example, sometimes it's because there's a cancer cell and the body can't destroy the cancer, so it arrests it and it becomes a non-functioning cell that unfortunately flies under the radar. So the body can't remove it through standard processes like autophagy, and it secretes inflammatory molecules like cytokines. And it then causes inflammation to nearby cells and tissues and increases the likelihood that those cells become senescent. So that's why it's like a zombie. It's actually causing nearby cells to also become zombified, if you will, right?
Yep.
So senescent cells, they go up exponentially as all of these mechanisms go up exponentially as we age, and they all contribute to each other. You'll see as I talk about them, I'll reference some of the others because they're all contributing to each other. Next is loss of proteostasis. So in the word proteostasis, we have two fragments there. We have proteo, like protein, and stasis, like non-changing, right? And so you want the proteins to be in this healthy state, but what ends up happening is the proteins start to be misfolded. So our ribosomes are producing proteins, and they're taking that from our DNA, right? So our DNA is really just an instruction set for producing proteins, and our ribosomes then produce those proteins. The protein needs to be folded in a very particular way for it to actually perform its function. And if it's misfolded, you may have heard of misfolded proteins, it can't do its job. And so this happens with increasing frequency as we get older. And what happens to those proteins? Well, they actually end up kind of sitting outside of the cell or sitting on the inside of the cell, not really doing their job, not getting removed. And so they start to like cause litter or garbage piles up. Imagine if your home started to have all of this garbage. Now you don't really have access to the different facilities within your home. The cell's not going to work as well. And so to that point, number four is altered intercellular communication. So cells all communicate with one another. We have this vast quantum like network within our bodies. Everything is communicating beyond what we can even comprehend at this point. And the way that they're communicating is through these proteins, right? So these proteins are like messenger molecules. And so if these proteins are not folding properly, they're not able to communicate the message as well as they should. If the receptor site on a cell for that protein is damaged or is not there for some reason, it's also not going to receive the message and then perform its function. So cells are not going to get the information that they need to be able to perform the function that the body needs at that moment. And so things like inflammation might run awry, right? You might have excess inflammation as a result because it's not getting the signal to turn off the inflammation, let's say, right? So that's number 4. Number 5 is genomic instability. This is one that everyone by now should be familiar with. It's another way to put it is DNA damage, right? So this was the predominant theory of why we age from the 1960s all the way up until like 15 years ago. The free radical theory of aging. That's why everyone's like, get all of your antioxidants, counteract all of these free radicals and the oxidative stress. And while there is an element of truth to that, it's actually much more complex and nuanced than that. A quick example is if you exercise, your body produces free radicals. If you take vitamin C and E after you exercise, which are antioxidants, you're intercepting those free radicals, the oxidation. You would think that's a good thing in the old perspective, the free radical theory perspective, but it's actually not, because what we found is that you don't get as much benefit from your exercise when you have the vitamin C and E afterwards, because those free radicals are actually signaling molecules. They're telling our cells how to behave and to grow bigger, stronger muscles. And if you're intercepting them, you're not getting as much of a signal. So you're taking a fraction of that away that you shouldn't be. So at the same time, you can have excess inflammation, excess oxidative stress. So imagine you're, say, fried foods and you're out in the sun with a lot of UV rays and you're drinking alcohol.
Smoking crack, like you see people, the aging process of people who are like smoking crack or doing hard drugs, you see the damage is accelerated.
Yeah, oh yeah, definitely. I thought you were kidding at first, but yeah, you're right. 100%.
No, like you see that element, and someone's like aging at an extremely rapid rate because
very
of this,
rapid. Exactly. So those are cases where oxidation is excessive, and you do want to counteract that oxidation, because what it leads to is genomic instability, DNA damage, and these DNA errors that start to accumulate. They then the cell replicates, and you have this DNA damage, and then it can turn into cancer, obviously, right? So this is something that we do want to reduce, the genomic instability. It's just that the way we go about doing it is not necessarily by counteracting all forms of free radicals. It's just when it becomes excessive and damaging in that case. Number 6 is epigenetic alteration. So people are using the term epigenome a lot now. Oftentimes it's not necessarily being used in the right way. One way to think about the epigenome is if you've got a piano, the piano's at your genes. They're hard coded. You can't change the keys easily, right? They're permanent on the piano. The epigenome is like the piano player. And the piano player is going to decide what tune to play. And then by extension, the music that's coming out of the piano, that's like, let's just say that's the proteome. That's the proteins that are coming out from the piano that's being played by the pianist. So the epigenome is essentially which keys or which genes are going to be played and which genes are not going to be played. And as we get older, certain genes that should be turned on, like anti-inflammatory genes, get turned off for some reason. And pro-inflammatory genes that shouldn't be turned on get turned on. And so there's this change in the epigenome that actually leads to negative health outcomes. And this is what people like Dr. David Sinclair at Harvard has really popularized, this idea of epigenetic reprogramming, where you can take something known as Yamanaka factors, named after the Nobel laureate from Japan who discovered them. They're specific enzymes. So again, we're back to proteins. Enzymes are proteins. With Yamanaka factors, you can take a cell that's old and you can restore it to its youthful state. And if you continue to apply the Yamanaka factors, you can even turn it into the equivalent of a embryonic stem cell. So, which is good and bad depending on the circumstance. Like if you're applying it to a living human, you don't want it to go that far, right? You want to stop well before that. But in other cases, imagine taking a person's skin cell, a woman, let's say, and being able to produce brand new eggs that are healthy for fertilization to be able to give birth, right? So this is something that's on the horizon. It's actually being worked on right now, and this is possible through epigenetic reprogramming.
Just a segue there, because there is a therapy that was outlined in ancient Eastern philosophy called Kalpa or something along that lines, which involves people being entombed in this kind of process with jewels, etc. And it's reported that they would come out, it would go in relatively old and then come back as a much younger version of themselves. And I always thought there's always a historical element of truth in what we might see as myth or allegory. But what you're saying here is that science has actually found a mechanism that could say that's potentially possible.
Yes. Well, so here's the exception. I'll get into a little bit of the weeds, and this is what the scientists in the field, the biogerontologists, are actively debating. It's one thing to take a cell and make that younger again. It's another thing to take an organ and make that younger again. And it's been done. So I did go to Switzerland, to University of Lausanne, to meet with the professor who did this. His name is Professor Ocampo. And he was able to take mice, old mice, and inject their livers with these Yamanaka factors and was able to make them their livers the equivalent of young mice again, like say teenage versions of the mice. And it lasted. The effect worked, right? And so now scientists like David Sinclair are trying to apply it to human eyes. So blindness from like age-induced blindness.
Right.
Now, here's the exception. Let's just say David Sinclair is able to actually effectively do this. The question then becomes, what about whole body aging? It's one thing to target a specific organ, but our bodies are far more complex than that. And you can't just like drink the mix or inject it and then say, let's hope for the best, right? It doesn't work that way. So it can potentially restore and rejuvenate specific organs. But then there are other organs that are incredibly complex, like the heart and the brain are notoriously complex for rejuvenation. So you might be able to say cure blindness for some of these people, but if they're getting Alzheimer's, well, then what?
Correct. Makes total sense to me. All right, next step.
Next one. All right, so we're up to number 7, telomere shortening. So this was another very popular one. People for a while thought that telomeres would be directly correlated to your age, whether chronological or biological. It's turned out that it's not as strong of a correlation. It's somewhere in the neighborhood of, I believe, 0.3 correlation to your age. So there's correlation, but not that strong. Now, your telomeres are the protective end caps of your chromosomes. Your chromosomes are what contain all of your DNA. And so think of it as almost like the ends of your shoelaces. If the ends of your shoelaces get torn off, then the fabric or the threads for your shoelace, they become frayed. Imagine that that's your DNA being exposed. That's a bad thing, obviously. When it comes to your telomeres, they get shorter every time there's a cellular division. So let's go back to some of the things we were talking about. If there's a lot of let's just say cellular insults, too much oxidation, and there's DNA damage. The body is like, all right, we need to destroy this cell and recreate a new one because the DNA, it's not functioning properly. All right. So now you created a new cell, your telomeres got a little bit shorter. So the more oxidative damage you've got, the more DNA damage that's coming from it. Now you're going to recreate cells and you're going to shorten your telomeres at an accelerated rate, right? So that's just an example of how these kind of play into each other. Telomeres are interesting in the sense that some people want their telomeres to be as long as possible. There's some controversy wondering, it's a question whether if you make your telomeres too long, it might increase the risk of cancer. Some scientists say that's absolutely not the case, but it is an open question. Where telomeres really become a concern is if you're in the lower percentile for your age, if they become too short. Like if you get your telomeres measured and they're like you're in the like the 10th percentile or 20th percentile, you're getting close to potentially reaching what's known as the telomeric brink. If you go beyond the telomeric brink, now your risk of certain types of cancers and even death goes up significantly. But if you're in the 50th percentile, 60th percentile, and so on, like you're in a good place. You don't really have to worry about it. So it's more of a check off the box metric. As long as your telomeres are not excessively short, you'll be fine. Next is deregulated nutrient sensing. So whenever we consume foods, we are sending signals to our body on how they should behave. So take, for example, a high animal protein diet and full of carbs. What you're going to do in that case is you're going to stimulate a biological pathway known as mTOR. mTOR is a growth pathway. So it's going to tell your body to create more and more cells, more tissue, more fat, more muscles, whatever it is, depending on your circumstance. That sounds good. And in some cases, it is good. But in modern society, we're in this constantly fed state, right? We don't have what we had through evolution of these feast famine cycles. And a famine in today's terms would be essentially a fast. Nobody is really fasting nowadays, except for those who are health enthusiasts like us. But most people are not. And so if you're constantly fed, you're constantly getting these mTOR stimulating proteins, and a lot of carbs and so on, you're always in growth mode and you're going to have a higher incidence of cancer, for example. You're going to accelerate the aging process. And there's actually animal studies where they look at, for example, mice, and they give them proteins that are lower in specific amino acids that are very common in animal proteins like methionine, isoleucine, leucine. So they give them either low dose of that or high dose. And they find that if it's high dose, the animals die earlier and they age faster. And if it's low dose, the animals die or live much longer and they age slower. So where does this leave us? I think practically speaking, like I eat animal protein. I'm not a vegetarian or vegan. I think that if we're going to eat animal proteins, we need to be cognizant of this growth signal. And we're going to want to have periods in which we protein fast essentially. So that might be either fasting outright, not eating anything for say 24 hours every so often, or even sometimes longer, depending on your health status, or do a protein fast where you're having a day where you're really just eating fats for that day, like avocados and nuts and stuff like that. And maybe some periods where you are only eating plant-based proteins, right? So there is something to be said about that, because in that point you are down regulating mTOR. And then another nutrient signal that goes up is AMPK. AMP kinase is it's stimulated when you exercise intensely. It's stimulated when you fast. And it's basically, if you think of our energy currency within our bodies, what the mitochondria is producing is ATP. Is it's detecting that the ATP, which has three phosphate groups, when you use that energy, it drops down to either two phosphates or one phosphate. If a muscle has too much of the AMP of monophosphate, AMPK is stimulated, and it's basically saying we need more energy. It's a starvation signal. We need more energy, and different other processes turn on at that point. And this is all, again, correlated with health span and lifespan. So to simplify it, we're in this state where AMPK is typically very low and mTOR is typically very high. And when you're constantly in that state, negative health outcomes result and accelerated aging is the result. When you switch the ratio for once and you have lower mTOR and higher AMPK, which can be in the form of exercise, diet. It can be in the form of even prescription drugs like metformin and rapamycin, which are longevity-related drugs. All of these can kind of switch that ratio and put you in a healthier state. So next is stem cell exhaustion. So everyone's hearing about stem cells nowadays. So stem cells are what are making the copies of our cells for us. As we age, we have fewer of them. They're just dying off. It's naturally part of the aging process, or the ones we have are making imperfect replicas of our cells. And so what we want to do is try to preserve those stem cells. And if you're having like a lot of cellular damage, like going back to what we said before, a lot of oxidative damage and so on, you need to recreate your cells. Well, you're exhausting those stem cells. You're activating them too often. And so that is something that can also accelerate the loss of those stem cells. Next is inflammaging. So inflammaging is a play on words. We have inflammation and we have aging. And the reason why we don't simply call it inflammation is because inflammation will describe like a particular state, but inflammaging is this continuum. It starts, you could argue, as early as after puberty. That's really when aging starts. But at that point, it's a quiet whisper. No one would ever hear it. If you fast forward to when you're 30, that's when there's some noticeable inflammation or inflammaging, chronic inflammation beginning. But if you're living a healthy life, it's still very quiet. You can hardly hear it. It's when you're hitting 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s that it becomes exponentially louder. And eventually it just becomes this very loud, obnoxious noise, if you will. And so any things that we can do to try to reduce the inflammation in the body, which if you're focused on all of these mechanisms that I've already been describing, you're going to have a positive impact on inflammaging. That's important because inflammation is the root cause of many of the diseases that we are all trying to avoid. So that's one of the newer ones, one of the 3 newer ones that was introduced just over a year ago. Number 11 is disabled autophagy. So autophagy, I briefly mentioned it before. This is the idea of our bodies, typically our immune system, that is identifying old cells that are not performing their function and ingesting them, basically recycling their parts, their amino acids and their lipids and so on, and using them to recreate new cells. And as we age, our body is not as capable of effectively inducing this autophagy state. And finally, number 12 is dysbiosis. So we have a microbiome all over, including our skin, but what they predominantly mean is our gut microbiome. And as we get older, our microbiome becomes less diverse than when we're young. And then the actual species in our microbiome tend to not be the most ideal species. For example, there are more of the pro-inflammatory species in our gut. And so we have these gut organ axes. I believe there's 10 of them. And so that's everything from like our gut brain axis, our gut skin axis, gut liver, gut kidney, muscle, bone, and so on. So things happening in our gut are impacting all of these different organs. And so if that microbiome is degrading as we age, it's going to also have an impact on all of these organs.
That might be the best summation of the mechanisms of aging I've ever heard. So thank you for that. My listeners are going to go crazy for that. I think that was well done and very great allegories and stuff as well to kind of get people to grasp these concepts. So I'm sure that took a long time to kind of get all those elements. So thank you for that.
At Bioptimizers, our mission is to fix digestion. And a cornerstone of digestion is gut flora. P3OM is our patented probiotic formula. In fact, we call it the Navy SEALs of probiotics. You see, strong proteolytic or protein digesting activity is paramount to having a healthy gut flora. And of course, P3OM provides that. The good news is, unlike weaker probiotics, P3OM survives the digestion process. What it does is it basically multiplies the good guys while protecting you against pathogens, or what some people call the bad guys. P3OM really helps to rebuild your digestion. And what that allows you to do is to maximize nutrient uptake, energy, and metabolism. To find out more of how P3OM can help you, go to www.bioptimizers.com.
I guess in your work, what are the areas that you have isolated or maybe your step down process of how you've been able to take this knowledge and translate it into, say, actionable items that you do on a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis in order to offset these mechanisms? And the second part to that is, where do you feel most people are failing or would get the most value from if they put their, say, attention on?
Yeah, great question. So when I think of longevity now, like we're going to the like another extreme. So there we were looking at the microscopic mechanisms. If we go to another extreme end of the spectrum is like actual lifestyle, right? Like our
Okay, yeah.
day-to-day lifestyles. And how is that impacting those mechanisms microscopically, but then ultimately our phenotype? Our phenotype is essentially what we amount to, like our physical state and our cognition. So like what we actually are, the results of all of these inputs lead to who we are. And so lifestyle, we can break it down into nutrition, and that doesn't only include the foods we eat, but also the time in which we eat it and the time in which we're not eating, right? So that's all involved in nutrition, activity, which includes exercise, rest and recovery, which I would include sleep in there, and psychology, which I would say that we should include in psychology, purpose, relationships, community, all of that, and stress management. And then we can add a fifth category, which is supplements and prescription drugs that might have favorable effects directly on these mechanisms. So if we start with nutrition, I already spoke a little bit about, for example, just protein and how we should think about protein, because a lot of people think, oh, more protein is better. And that is true for people who are not getting enough protein to maintain their muscle mass, which is a significant portion of the population, especially older females. They run into that issue a lot.
Yeah.
But for some of us, myself included, it's actually maybe a little bit too much protein, and we actually want the minimum effective dose so that we're not overstimulating mTOR, as I mentioned before. Other things to consider. So when it comes to diet, there's like diets are like religions. People are passionate about these. I don't have any particular stake in this game other than wanting to have the best diet that's going to make me live the longest. And so I will add foods into my diet that I don't even like the taste of because they're very healthy, and remove things because I learned that they're not ideal. So I'm agnostic. I'm open to anything. What I'd say is that whether it be an extreme like a carnivore diet or a vegan diet, I don't think either of those is ideal for longevity. Now, they're ideal for other purposes. If you have an autoimmune condition and you find carnivore works for you, great, do it. Or if you're a bodybuilder and you want to follow a carnivore diet with a little bit of rice or something for carbs, go ahead, do it. If you have ethical concerns about eating animals and you want to be vegan, that's fine. When it comes to longevity, the most researched and proven diet to, and I wouldn't even call it a diet, I would just say it's like a rule set, is the Mediterranean diet. The Mediterranean diet is the most researched to improve health span and lifespan. And the great thing about it is it's very easy to comply with, and there's many different flavors of it. You can have like a Greek style Mediterranean diet, Italian style, Turkish style. You can even have an Okinawan Japanese diet that is not technically Mediterranean, but it follows the rules essentially, and it can have the same outcomes, right? So that's the diet to really focus on. And you can look up online what the like essentially the rules are from a scientific perspective to comply with the Mediterranean diet. But it includes a lot of um, vegetables and fruits and a moderate amount of animal protein. So it's not like the animal protein isn't the main course. It's kind of like the side dish, and the vegetables and the grains and so on. That's the main course. So that's when it comes to diet, that's how I would think about it. Then in terms of timing and calories and so on, try to get a fast into your routine. Um, a lot of people are into time restricted eating, which they oftentimes call intermittent fasting. Technically, it's not. It's really time restricted eating. If you're eating, say, in a 16, 8 hour eating window, 16-hour fast. But I'd say if you have adequate muscle and you're healthy and your doctor doesn't see any reason for you to not do it, consider every so often going beyond 24 hours without a meal. It's really difficult at first if you've never done it before. For this is an example of a time I would suggest trying a ketogenic diet because it makes it much easier to go into a fast because you're already in ketosis, and so your body can use your fat stores to create ketones, and you're going to like glide into that fast much more easily than if you're like used to carbs and you have blood sugar fluctuations. But consider trying to do a fast every so often, I'd say.
What
Now
would be
there are
the frequency?
exceptions.
What would be the frequency on that? Do you
Yeah, yeah, and it's a good question, and I think overall we need to be cognizant of sex and age, and
Mm,
also like physical health. So, for example, if you're overweight and you're 30-year-old male with adequate muscle mass, you can fast for a long time, often. Of course, medical supervision, but you could do multi-day fast pretty often because you'll be losing the body fat. There are ways to protect your muscle in the process that you can look into. But for them, I'd say they're on one end of the spectrum where they can do it a lot. If you're very lean, like I am, I'm under 10% body fat. I can do these fasts. I've done 72 hours before, but I don't do them too frequently because I'm already like stimulating the AMPK very well because I'm so physically active. I work out every day and so on. So I'm not going to get as many benefits from the fast as somebody who's less active than me. If you take females, they have hormonal issues oftentimes when they fast for prolonged periods, and that's something to be very cognizant of. And there are ways to even look at the menstrual cycle and find timing, which I don't know as much about, but there's guidelines for that to do it on certain days, and it won't be as impactful. And then finally, if you're older and let's just say you're over 60, 65 years old, sarcopenia becomes a bigger issue, maintaining your muscle mass. The last thing you want to do is fast and in the process lose muscle mass, especially in your legs. Because if you fall and break your hip, you have like 30% chance of not surviving past a year at that point once you're, in older age. So you have to consider your personal circumstance, your situation, and then act accordingly. So it's not a blanket recommendation that everyone should fast. It's different for everyone, but I do think that everyone can get to the point where they have a smaller eating window. You shouldn't be eating from the moment you wake up until you fall asleep. Try to compress that, and as long as you're eating enough calories and especially protein if you're older, then I think that you're in safe territory for everyone.
excellent. Activity wise, what's your ratio? Because you have muscle mass being a big contributing factor. That then you have like brain health, etc., which seems to tilt towards more of the cardio side of making sure you get adequate blood flow to the brain. What's your ratio on that?
Yeah, so for everyone it's going to be different, but you do raise a good point. All of the brain benefits that come from exercise. In fact, people oftentimes will think like I should play Sudoku or chess or something to stimulate my brain. And although that those are great, you actually stimulate your brain and stave off Alzheimer's more effectively from physical exercise than you do from those activities. You're increasing, for example, the brain-derived neurotrophic factor and BDNF in your brain and IGF-1 in your brain better from exercise. So cardio is great. Actually, things that involve memory or coordination while being physically active are even better. So things like tennis or dancing, these like choreographed dancing, these types of things actually are even better. I don't personally, do choreographed dancing, but a lot of people are into that, and that is fantastic. So getting the cardio and doing something that's mentally stimulating simultaneously is I would say great for brain health. I personally weight lift 4 days per week, and I do intense cardio, typically 45 minutes to an hour, 3 days per week. And then I walk a lot every day. I'm walking probably 5 or 6 miles per day, regardless
We have
of the
very
day.
similar protocols, so I was curious about that one. So that's cool.
Yeah, I think it's a good balance because also when you think about the muscle mass, of course, there's the value that we talked about, like you don't want to fall and so on. But it's also these are like metabolic sinks. Like if you have carbs, now your body has somewhere to shuttle with the insulin that sugar, the carbs, the glucose into your muscles. If you don't have enough muscle, it's going to turn into fat. And you're also going to have very high levels of insulin. You're going to be less insulin sensitive and so on. So your muscles are really good for that reason.
Rest,
So,
recovery, sleep. What's your
yep,
what's your
rest,
how do you
recovery,
look at that?
sleep. So when it comes to rest and recovery, I say listen to your body. Throughout my 20s, I didn't. I would work out in the morning and in the evening. I was overdoing it. I got eventually an Aura ring and I track my heart rate variability. I see if I have disrupted sleep at night. These are different factors that can indicate you are overstressed, which can be in both the physical form of overtraining. It could also be in the psychological form, too much lifestyle stress or work stress. So both of them, though, uh, they should both be taken seriously and I would say like in the same way, in the same regard. In other words, if you have a lot of psychological stress, that can also impact you physically, and it will impact you physically. So treat them as almost one and the same. And so if your heart rate variability is low, or you're waking up a lot in the middle of the night, you're not sleeping well, and so on, take it easy, pull back. Now, when it comes to sleep, you want to get between 7 and 9 hours. Fewer than 1 in 200 people have a genetic polymorphism that enables them to thrive on less than 7 hours of sleep. So I know a lot of friends of mine, like probably 1 in 5, thinks they have this polymorphism, and I can tell you they don't. A lot of people think that they can. The thing is that once you get them to like have a strict sleep routine, and they're actually sleeping for 7.5, 8 hours, they feel like different people. I know I do. So sleep is very important. Not only the duration of the sleep and the quality of the sleep, which are obvious, but also the regularity of the sleep timing. You want to go to sleep at approximately the same time every night and wake up at approximately the same time every morning, because studies have found that you can have the same duration of sleep and even high quality of sleep, but if you're shifting the time throughout the day, you actually lose a lot of the benefits of that sleep. And so, like weekends, for example, if you're typically going to sleep at 11 p.m., on weekends, you don't want to go to sleep at 1 a.m. unless it's occasional for special occasions, sure. But generally, if you're going to sleep at 11 on weekdays, try to get it at like 11:30 on a weekend. Don't go beyond an hour, ideally.
So we've got two quick ones. I know we're running out of time.
Sure.
Psychology and purpose, connection, community, all that stuff, kind of a big element, I suspect.
Yeah, so let's start with stress. Stress is something that has a very acute, significant negative effect on our health. So when we have a lot of stress, our cortisol levels rise. Now, cortisol is not always bad. It's what wakes us up in the morning. We have higher cortisol from the stress of exercise, but those are acute instances, acute doses of cortisol. The problem is when it's chronic, and it becomes chronic when you are an anxious person or you have a lot of stress in your life. Now, I wouldn't go as far as saying get rid of the stress in your life, because stress can also be hormetic. Stress can make you stronger. It's all about the dose and how you cope with that stress. So I would say, instead of trying to get rid of all of the stress in your life, of course, if there's unnecessary stress, fine, get rid of it. But otherwise, I think what's more important is figuring out how to cope with the stress. Things like meditation, journaling, therapy, talking it out with a loved one. All of these things are helpful for you to be able to start to cope with the stress, trying to redefine the stress, change your perspective on it, and so on. I think that those are really important, because hormesis is real. It happens biologically. It's why when we exercise, we get stronger. But it's also, if you eliminated all of the stress in your life, you would be a snowflake, right? Like
Yeah,
anything
exactly.
would. And so you need to have these stressors. You just need to know how to cope with them well. I think one of the ways that can help you cope with it is having a purpose, having a higher purpose in your life. And when you focus on that higher purpose and you see this little thing that's making you stressed, like someone like cut you off on the road, or your coworker said something to you you didn't like, or you come home and your loved one didn't like prepare food, or the home is a mess or something. It's like, are those really things worth getting all stressed out about? Like, I have a higher purpose in my life that's much more important. And kind of like being above that, I think is something that's very possible, and it's important for us to not focus on the little things that don't really matter ultimately, and focus on the bigger picture of purpose.
Now, I know we had supplement and prescription drugs, but I know you're on a time constraint, so maybe we'll bring you back for that side. I would like to talk a little bit about Novos, your company, and how you're using that company to identify these elements and I guess provide maybe insights for people to take action?
Sure. So Novos, we're a public benefit corporation, which I founded it this way so we could do more for the public interest than just focus exclusively on profit. We've got three legs to the company. The first leg is our formulations. We are actually a biotech company. Most supplement companies are really just marketing companies. They will take historical research done by some other lab and then market a product based on that research and say that they're scientific, but they're not actually doing any science of their own. We run scientific studies. We work with top university scientists across the world, and we patent our formulas, which is rarely possible because there's nothing new being created. We're actually making new discoveries and creating entirely new formulations. So, for example, Novos Core is our foundational product. This has been studied and found in mice, for example, to extend aged mouse lifespan more than any supplement ever studied across the world. If you look at ingredients like NAD plus, like nicotinamide riboside, NR, that has extended mouse lifespan by 0% in some studies to up to 5%. We extended aged mouse lifespan by almost 20%. So almost 4 times as much as this very popular supplement that many people take. So we've got multiple formulations. So that's the second leg is biological age testing. So we can look at your epigenome. Remember, before that is the piano player. And we can look at patterns with which genes are on and off. And we can determine how fast or slow you're aging, as well as organ-specific ages. And then we can give you guidance for how to improve all of that, how to slow down your aging. You mentioned I slowed my aging by 31% compared to the average person. So there's different lifestyle guidance, some of which we've already talked about, but we can get more personalized with that. And the third leg of the company is the digital side, and the testing plays a role in that digital side. So the digital side is an app that we have is completely free. It's called Novos Life. It's on iOS and Android. We give you a free biological age result based on AI. It was created by a university researcher at University of Washington, a brilliant mathematician. We have personalized guidance for your lifestyle. And if you do get the epigenetic test run, you can then chat with our AI bot to get personalized guidance based on your specific results and ask any questions that you might have about your results. So we're more than just we're not a supplement company. We're really a biotechnology company with scientists on our payroll helping us to make new discoveries, new innovative approaches on the molecular side. That's the formulations. On the bioinformatics side, that's the testing side. And then on the digital side with AI integrated.
Man, I want to dive into all those things. I know we're close to the end of our schedule, but I want to be respectful of your time. I love what you're doing. This is fantastic. Got a lot of shared values. Where can people find out more information about this and follow and dive into some of these supplements you're offering, the testing, the apps and stuff where they can say, hey, you know what? This was extremely informative. I want to get more information. I want to get involved in this. It's obvious you know what you're doing and you've got good research. So I'm very enthusiastic about this for our listeners.
Great. Thank you. So novoslabs.com is our website. We're on all of the social networks as Novos Labs. You'll find on our website, we've got a blog, tons of articles and content on the topic of aging. We've got Face Age, which the Wall Street Journal has featured. It's a tool where you can take a selfie, and with AI, we can tell you how young or old you look and then give you personalized guidance for improving your skin health and so on. And then we have Novos Life app, which you can find on our website if you search for it, or if you go on one of the iTunes or the Android shop, you can just search for Novos Life and you'll find the app there. And then I personally have a website, a blog called Slow My Age. It's just where I share my own personal thoughts on the field or give updates about the company and so on. I just launched a YouTube channel. I've got less than 100 followers. It's only about a week, but I'm going to start putting out YouTube videos. And I'm also on Instagram, TikTok, and Reddit as Slow My Age.
Chris, what an amazing story that you have, that you took what would be a debilitating condition as a young man and completely transform that into not only a transformative expression for yourself, but a contribution to society at large. And that's a super commendable element, which I really appreciate and align with. So thank you so much for providing all this information to us. Is there any final things you'd like to say to our audience before we sign off?
I think one thing is that it was really empowering to me when I came to realize that aging is something that we can actually slow down. We can literally slow it down. Most of us think that it's in our genetic code, or some people think that God determines when you're going to die. No, it's actually something that we have control over. We can speed it up and we can slow it down. And it's all about learning the education of what is going to slow it down so that you can integrate more of that into your life.
Well, I predict great things for you and for Novos. This is the bleeding cutting edge that almost everyone is interested in. And now that we have the science and the tech to actually validate in actionable items, it's a very exciting field. And I want to wish you all the success in the world. And hopefully I can get you back, because I really wanted to dive in a little bit more on some of the supplemental aspects that you're offering and some of the elements which are contributing to these type of benefits. That's really powerful. But I know you got a short time schedule. I want to be respectful of it. Thank you so much for joining us. For all our listeners, we have all of the links in the show notes as well as summary. Please start applying this in your daily life. See the results, because living well it's so rewarding. Excellence is its own reward, and living well is a reward that extends not only to your own life, but to everyone around you. So for all of us at Bioptimizers, this is Wade Lightheart for the Awesome Health Podcast Show. We'll see you on the next episode.
And now for a Bioptimizer's fixed digestion tip, rapid cheat meal relief. Research shows that cheat meals can actually be an effective way to boost your metabolism. One key weight loss hormone, leptin, can be increased by up to 30% following a cheat meal. The challenge with the cheat meals is that all those extra calories and lower food quality can be hard to digest, which means you could be totally sidelined with a food coma after big cheat meals. The solution is to take strong digestive enzymes like masszymes, which will help rapidly digest and break down the extra food. 3 to 5 capsules before or right after your cheat meal can make a huge difference in how you feel following the cheat meal. If it's a cheat day with multiple large meals, you might want to go up to 10 capsules or higher to help you power through all that food. To save 10% on masszymes, go to masszymes.com. That's MASSZYMES.com and enter the code CHEAT10 at checkout.
Thank you for listening to the Bioptimizers Awesome Health Podcast. You can find more information at bioptimizers.com.